My fiancée left me at the altar for my best man, and she whispered it in my ear right before walking past me down the aisle to kiss him. I swear I felt my heart stop. One moment I was standing there sweating through my tux, thinking about forever, and the next she leaned in, brushed her lips near my cheek like she was going to kiss me, and said, "I can't do this. I'm in love with Caleb." Then she walked down the aisle and grabbed him, kissed him, right in front of everyone. Cameras flashing, gasps echoing through the church. My mother covered her mouth like she was going to be sick. Her father looked like he'd been shot. I could hear my own blood roaring in my ears. I didn't chase her. I didn't yell. I didn't even cry. I just stood there while my world cracked in half. Let me back up. My name's Darren. I'm 33, and up until that day, I thought I had everything figured out. A steady career, a beautiful fiancée named Lila, a future mapped out. And my best friend Caleb, someone I'd known since we were kids, was supposed to stand beside me on the most important day of my life. Instead, he was standing in front of me, kissing the woman I thought was mine. What people didn't know, and what they definitely didn't know, is that things had already started feeling off months before the wedding. The way Caleb started showing up a little too often. The way Lila would sometimes go quiet when I walked into a room, or change the subject if I asked too much. So I started planning. Quietly. I bought a tiny mic, hid it in my apartment, in my car. I synced my phone to an old iPad I stashed in the coat closet. I never confronted either of them, not directly. I just listened and watched. I told myself it was paranoia until it wasn't. What Lila didn't know as she kissed Caleb in front of 200 guests was that I already had all the proof. That by the time the cake was delivered, I had enough recordings to destroy them both. And that I wasn't going to be humiliated quietly, because if they wanted a spectacle, I was about to give them one they'd never forget. I didn't even know what I was looking for at first. It started with this gnawing feeling in my chest, like a dull ache that kept coming back every time Lila smiled at me a little too quickly or Caleb showed up unannounced. There wasn't a single moment where I thought, they're definitely doing something behind my back. It was more like a slow drip, a look held a second too long, a joke that felt more like a shared memory I wasn't part of. Lila started locking her phone. Caleb stopped tagging me in posts when we hung out. Little things, petty things, or so I thought. One night, about 3 months before the wedding, I came home from work early. Lila was sitting on the couch with her laptop open and her phone in her lap. And the second she saw me, she jumped. Jumped, like I'd caught her doing something illegal. She laughed it off, but I remember the way her hand hovered too long over the phone screen before she tilted it away. That night, when she went to bed, I sat in the kitchen for hours staring at nothing. I felt like an idiot even wondering about it, but something wouldn't let me drop it. I started small. I left my old iPad charging in the coat closet and synced it to her iPhone using the same Apple ID she'd once logged into to stream movies. I didn't even know if it would work, but suddenly text previews started popping up. Not full conversations, just fragments, names. "See, can't wait to see you. Last night was..." And then it would cut off. I didn't confront her. I told myself I needed more. I needed proof. I bought a cheap voice recorder online and stuck it under the front seat of my car. I picked up an extra smart plug for the living room speaker and routed it through an app that could listen for certain phrases. I felt like a man possessed. And still, there was this part of me praying I'd find nothing, that I'd just gotten cold feet or wedding stress or some anxiety disorder no one had diagnosed. But then came the night Caleb came over for movie night. Just the three of us. We drank wine, laughed at a dumb action movie, and they were both perfectly normal until I got up to go to the bathroom. I wasn't gone long, maybe 4 minutes, tops. But when I reviewed the audio later from the recorder I'd tucked under the couch, I nearly threw up. Caleb had whispered something to her when I left the room. "You didn't tell him yet, did you?" She didn't answer right away. Then, "Not yet." "I will, just not now." Caleb had the nerve to chuckle. "We're gonna break his heart?" That was the moment something inside me snapped. Not loudly, not dramatically. It was cold, quiet, like the sound of ice cracking underfoot. And from that second on, I wasn't Darren the groom. I was Darren the observer. Darren the recorder. Darren, the man about to make sure they paid for every lie, every stolen kiss, every smug, secret look they thought I hadn't noticed. I began logging everything: calls, texts, photos. Every time Lila said she was working late, I noted the time and date. Every time Caleb just happened to drop by, I took screenshots of the synced text history that showed they'd coordinated it. I even followed Caleb once to a small Airbnb just outside the city limits. When I saw Lila's car already parked outside, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I smiled because now I knew. I knew what they were doing. I knew how long it had been going on. Over 8 months, it turned out. Almost the entire time we'd been engaged. I knew they thought I was too soft, too trusting, too average to catch on. But I also knew something they didn't. I didn't plan on stopping the wedding. I planned on letting it happen, because they were going to humiliate me on that day anyway. Only they thought they would be the ones walking away with the upper hand. But I had something better than anger. I had documentation, evidence, and I was going to let them expose themselves right when they thought they'd won. So I smiled and I planned, and the wedding day started to look less like a tragedy and more like the perfect stage. It took me a full day to listen to the entire recording from the night Caleb whispered to her. I kept pausing it, rewinding, playing it back, making sure I'd heard it right. That one sentence, "We're gonna break his heart," kept hitting like a hammer every time I replayed it. They weren't even conflicted. They weren't torn or scared or even ashamed. They enjoyed it. They thought I'd never find out. And that confidence, that smug certainty, was exactly what I was going to use against them. From that point on, I stopped pretending to be the man who didn't know. I became the man who watched, who documented, who gathered. I went from gut suspicion to collecting a digital museum of betrayal. The next piece came 2 nights later. Lila told me she was going out with her bridesmaids for a planning night. That wasn't weird. She'd been doing a lot of that lately. Dress fittings, cake tastings, table layouts. But something about the way she kissed me before she left, it felt staged, like she was performing love instead of living it. As soon as she closed the door, I opened my laptop and watched the iPad feed. I saw her location update within minutes. She wasn't heading downtown where her maid of honor lived. She was driving west toward Caleb's neighborhood. That night, I activated a backup mic I'd stashed in Caleb's Jeep months earlier during a snowboarding trip. He'd always let me drive, and I used one of those moments to wedge the recorder under the passenger seat carpeting. I'd honestly forgotten it was even there until I checked the app. It was still live. At first, it was just low chatter, laughing, talking, the clinking of glasses. Then her voice came through clearly. "So, what happens after the wedding?" she asked. A pause. "Depends," Caleb said. "How dramatic you want it to be." She laughed. "I want him to crack. I want him to finally show some backbone. Maybe punch you, or cry. Something real?" I didn't know what burned more, her tone like it was all a game, or the way Caleb replied so casually, "He won't." That's why this works. They were fantasizing about my humiliation like it was part of their foreplay. I closed my laptop and stared at the wall. I didn't even feel anger anymore. It was something colder, cleaner, purpose. The next morning, while Lila was still asleep, I printed transcripts of that conversation and several others. I backed up every file to 2 different USB drives and sent them to a trusted friend in case anything happened to my devices. Then I started recording everything they said around me. Every joke, every glance. I asked leading questions just to see how they answered. When Lila got home that night, she sat on the couch, pretending she was exhausted from the stress of wedding planning. I offered her a glass of wine and rubbed her shoulders. I asked about the color scheme again, what flowers she'd decided on. She told me lavender and gold. I nodded, smiled, and internally marked the moment. Not because I cared about the colors, but because I knew she thought I was still clueless. A few days later, Caleb texted me something strange. "Still good for the tux fitting Friday." I hadn't scheduled any fitting for that day. In fact, I'd done mine already. When I asked what he meant, he replied, "Oh, Lila said you'd changed it." That was my confirmation. They were coordinating details behind me now. Caleb was relying on Lila's word more than mine. That meant they'd built a shared story. That meant they were already preparing for the aftermath, and I wasn't even supposed to see it coming. But I did, and I was going to let it keep unfolding. I took a day off work and drove to that Airbnb I'd seen Lila's car at before. I knocked on the door, pretending to be a delivery guy. The owner, a cheerful woman named Hannah, was friendly enough. I told her I had the wrong address, but before I left, I asked, "Hey, just curious, do you rent this place to a couple or solo guests?" "Oh, mostly a couple," she said, smiling. "Nice young pair. Blonde girl and her boyfriend. Been coming here twice a month like clockwork." I nodded, thanked her, and walked away, heart pounding. Not from surprise, but from validation. They had their secret little world. Hidden rendezvous, fantasy scripts, coordinated deceptions. But the more they expanded it, the more holes formed in their web. Back at home, I sat down and began organizing everything into a single digital folder. Insurance Wedding Day. I made a PDF timeline with cross-referenced audio files. I even added bookmarks and highlights. Every lie, every call, every betrayal, documented, time-stamped, archived, and they still had no idea. The hardest part? Pretending I still loved her, that I was still excited, that nothing was wrong. I had to smile through cake tastings, laugh during dance lessons. I had to kiss her knowing she had Caleb's breath on her mouth the night before. But I did it. I did it all, because I knew the day was coming. The day where they'd believe they'd finally won. The day she'd whisper in my ear and think she was destroying me. But I wasn't the one being destroyed. I was the one building the fuse. And it was almost time to light it. 3 weeks before the wedding, I finalized my plan. The strange part was how calm I felt about it all. I wasn't shaking with rage anymore. There was no boiling pot of revenge spilling over. Instead, it was all precision. Cold steps, clinical calculations. Every action had a reason. Every delay was part of the long game. I didn't want to just confront them. I wanted them to implode. Publicly, unforgettably, and by their own doing. I started with the wedding video team. Lila had hired a couple from out of town, some trendy duo she found on Instagram who did cinematic wedding edits with drones and soft focus filters. I contacted them secretly using an alternate email and requested a special project add-on. I told them it was for a surprise reel to be played at the reception, filled with testimonies and behind-the-scenes interviews for the bride and groom to react to. Something raw and honest that would be played right before the cake cutting. The woman running the account loved the idea. I told her I'd send clips. I began cutting the footage myself. I spliced together Caleb's whispered line, "We're gonna break his heart," with Lila's smirk, and "I want him to finally show some backbone." I lined them up with smiling photos of us together at our engagement shoot. I layered in screenshots of texts, locations, call logs, and synced audio clips. I timed it all to a piece of soft piano music they'd chosen for the walk down the aisle. I was crafting a love story turned horror film. I titled the video file simply, "For Lila and Darren. A Love Story." And I scheduled it to autoplay at the reception, embedded in the DJ's queue, triggered with a silent timer. By this point, I had become an expert in smiling while preparing detonation. The hardest part of the plan was what came next. The engagement party. It was at her parents' estate, a sprawling backyard setup with a tent, lights strung across the trees, a live band. Caleb was there, of course. He played the best man part to perfection, pouring me a drink, telling stories about our college days, hugging me like a brother. Lila beamed at us the whole time like we were one big, happy family. She didn't notice the way I studied her, every touch of her hand to Caleb's arm, every glance that lingered one heartbeat too long. They thought I was blind, and that blindness, fake as it was, let me get away with everything. That night, I took Caleb aside. "Hey, man," I said, my voice a little slurred. "I just want to say, I'm really lucky to have you in my corner." "Seriously?" A lot of guys wouldn't be cool with their best friend hanging around their fiancée this much. He gave a half smile, then laughed like I'd made a joke. Hey, it's all good. We're tight, always been. You think I can trust her? I asked, letting my voice drop into a whisper. Be real with me. He paused for a second, just a flicker, but then he clapped me on the back and said, If you can't trust Lila, you can't trust anyone. And just like that, he poured another drink and the conversation moved on. He didn't know I was recording the whole thing. I knew his words wouldn't matter in court, but in context, in tone, in performance, they were gold. I kept collecting. The final nail came 1 week later. Lila's maid of honor, Zoe, called me unexpectedly while Lila was out. Zoe and I were friendly, but not close. She sounded off. Hey, Darren, she said. I don't want to get in the middle of anything, but are you sure you want to go through with this? I played dumb. What do you mean? She hesitated. I saw something the other night, at the bachelorette party. Lila, she wasn't just drunk. She was all over Caleb, like touching his face, whispering in his ear. I thought maybe it was just the lighting or the wine or I don't know, but now I can't stop thinking about it. I didn't ask questions. I just said thank you. Zoe had no idea how late she was to the party. Still, it confirmed everything. Caleb wasn't just her affair, he was her choice. She wasn't confused or scared. She was rehearsing her next act. After I hung up, I uploaded everything to a private cloud link and printed a QR code. Then I designed a little card with a gold foil border. Looked just like a wedding table card. At the bottom it read, For a deeper look into our love story, scan here. I made 50 of them, slipped one into each table's centerpiece the night before the wedding. No one would notice them at first. Not until after the vows. Not until dinner. Not until that quiet lull before the cake. And then the cards would be found, the phones would be lifted, and the whispers would start. All before the final video played. Everything was in motion. Lila kissed me that night, whispering, I can't wait to be your wife. And I whispered back, me too. But in my head, I was already watching the whole thing burn. The morning of the wedding felt quiet. Too quiet, almost, like the air before a summer storm. Lila woke before me, kissed my forehead gently, and said she was heading to the bridal suite with her girls. I watched her go, her silhouette framed in soft morning light, her laugh trailing behind her, like a lie in lace. She thought today was the day she'd take everything from me, my love, my dignity, my peace. But really, it was the day I gave her everything she'd earned. I arrived at the venue an hour before the ceremony, playing the part of the nervous groom. Smiles, handshakes, a few nervous jokes about cold feet. The photographer took my picture as I adjusted my tie, staring thoughtfully out a window. It was a good shot. I'd look calm, noble even, like a man with hope in his heart. I was anything but. The DJ confirmed the cue file had been loaded successfully. He thought it was a surprise montage for my bride. The video crew double-checked their angles for the reception speeches. I made sure the QR cards were still discreetly tucked into the centerpieces. Everything was right where it needed to be. All I had to do now was wait. I stood at the altar as the music started. Caleb walked in, smirking, patting me on the back. You ready for forever? He whispered. I met his eyes and smiled. More than ever. Then Lila appeared. She looked beautiful, of course. Everyone gasped like they were seeing an angel descend. White satin, soft curls, that fake shy smile she always used when she wanted to win people over. She walked down the aisle with her father, who gave her away like she was some gift. And when she took my hand, her fingers trembled ever so slightly. I could feel it, the nerves, but not the kind you'd expect from a bride. This was tension, like she knew somewhere deep down that something was off. We said our vows. She teared up during hers, talked about destiny and trust and friendship. I almost laughed, almost. When it was my turn, I kept mine short. I vow to love you in truth, I said, letting my voice shake just enough. To honor you as long as honor exists between us, and to never forget who you are, no matter what. People awed? Lila smiled, confused for just a blink, then kissed me like she believed it. We were married. Applause, music, photos. The reception started with toast. Caleb gave one, of course. Darren's always been like a brother to me, he said. If I could choose a guy for Lila, it'd be him. Everyone laughed. I lifted my glass. To honesty, I said softly. Nobody noticed. Dinner passed in a blur of laughter and clinking forks. Lila and I danced. Caleb danced with her too. They were careful, but I saw it. The flickers of eye contact, the shared smirks, like kids passing notes in class, daring fate to catch them. Then the whispers started. First one table, then another. Phones out, heads turning, eyes narrowing. A ripple moving through the room as guests discovered the gold cards and scanned the codes. The link opened silently to a page titled, "For Those Who Want to Know the Truth." There was no dramatic reveal yet, just evidence. Screenshots, audio files, locations, short, time-stamped clips. At first people thought it was a joke. Then they saw the names, heard the voices, heard Caleb's voice. Lila's giggle. One woman gasped aloud, another dropped her phone. Zoe looked at me from across the room, her face pale. She mouthed, "Did you do this?" I nodded slowly. Then came the final cue. The DJ tapped his mic. Ladies and gentlemen, before we cut the cake, we have a little surprise video prepared by our groom. Applause. Lila squeezed my hand, surprised. I watched her face as the first image appeared on the screen. The three of us at the engagement party. Then came the audio. We're gonna break his heart. Lila's head whipped toward me. The room went silent. Clip after clip played. Texts from her to Caleb, secret meetups, giggles, strategy. The music played on, soft, elegant, completely at odds with the gut punch unraveling on screen. When it reached the part where Caleb asked, "How dramatic you want it to be?" and Lila replied, "I want him to crack," someone in the audience let out a low, stunned, "Jesus." I stepped forward as the final frame faded out. A picture of our wedding date with the words, "You're welcome to leave now." Lila was frozen. Caleb had gone ghost white. People stood up, confused, awkward, angry. Her parents were whispering furiously to each other. The officiant looked like he wanted to vanish into the floor. She finally turned to me, her voice barely a whisper. You knew?" I leaned in softly so only she could hear. "Since the night you said you loved how easy I was to lie to." Her eyes widened. She staggered back like I'd hit her. I took the mic. "Thank you all for coming," I said, "and I apologize to anyone who came here expecting to celebrate love. I came here today to bury the idea that love should come without truth. I'll be filing for annulment in the morning. And to those of you wondering if this is real, yes, every second, every message, every lie." I looked at Caleb. "Hope you two are happy." Then I walked out, left the venue, got in my car, drove in silence. I didn't look back once. The morning after the wedding, I woke up to nearly 100 messages. Some were from guests, half shocked, half supportive. A few were angry. A few asked if it was staged. Others, like Zoe, just said, "I'm sorry." I had no idea it went that deep. But the ones that mattered most were from Lila and Caleb. Caleb sent a single message. "What the hell, man? We need to talk. Don't do this." Lila sent 9. They ranged from, "Please just talk to me," to, "I didn't mean to hurt you," to a long paragraph about how I had ruined everything we built together out of spite. My favorite part was the line, "You blindsided me." Blindsided her. The irony nearly made me laugh, but I didn't respond, not to either of them. Instead, I copied each message, saved screenshots, and forwarded them to my lawyer. I'd already started the annulment paperwork. My prenup had been tight, but now I had enough evidence of infidelity and emotional fraud to make sure she walked away with nothing but her own last name and a destroyed reputation. I didn't want revenge anymore, not in the active, hateful sense. I didn't want to see her hurt. I just wanted peace. And the only way to get that was to make sure she couldn't gaslight me, or anyone else, out of what had happened. 3 days later, the video went viral. Someone at the wedding had uploaded it anonymously to Reddit, r/petty revenge, of course. Then it made its way to TikTok, Twitter, YouTube. People started sharing the QR cards as memes. There were reaction videos, commentary threads. I trended on a few platforms for 48 hours. They called me the groom with receipts. Some said I was a hero. Some said I was cruel. A few accused me of emotional manipulation or trying to humiliate Lila publicly. Maybe I did. But humiliation wasn't the goal, it was clarity. I needed people to see what I'd seen, to know what had been hidden behind her flawless smile and careful lies. I ignored all of it and stayed off social media. I took a week off work. I went hiking, ate alone at diners, sat in parks with my phone turned off. For the first time in a year, I felt untangled. Eventually, I got an email from Caleb's fiancée. Her name was Michelle. I'd met her once briefly at some group dinner over a year ago. I barely remembered her. The subject line of her email just said, "Thank you." In the message, she explained how she'd confronted Caleb after watching the video online. He'd denied it at first, of course, then crumbled. He was a mess now, she said. Drinking, isolated. His firm had quietly pushed him out after some clients got wind of the scandal. She ended her email with, "He always thought he was smarter than everyone. Turns out you were 10 steps ahead." I stared at that sentence for a long time. 10 steps ahead. I didn't feel like a genius. I just felt betrayed and tired and stubborn enough not to go down quietly. Lila didn't go away quietly either. She tried to play the victim in a few circles. Told people I was emotionally distant, that I weaponized humiliation. But the truth had its own rhythm. And once people saw the real her, the texts, the plans, the cold way she treated it all like a game, those whispers died out. She moved in with her sister in another city, I heard. Caleb, last I checked, had gone off-grid completely. I didn't feel joy hearing that, just relief. Like the noise had finally stopped. 6 months later, I stood on a beach in Oregon, wind in my face, a coffee in my hand, watching a couple take wedding photos at sunset. They looked young, scared and excited. He was fixing her veil. She was laughing at something he said. I hoped, for their sake, that they were honest with each other. Brutally, beautifully honest. Because love without truth? That's not love. That's theater. And I'd already given the best performance of my life. So when the sun dipped beneath the horizon and the chill crept in, I finished my coffee, turned away from the sea, and walked back towards something better. Not revenge, not victory, just peace. And that was enough.